The silence shattered at 2:17 a.m. Shadow, the blind German shepherd, erupted from his corner with a growl that turned to frantic barking. His paws scrabbled on hardwood as he launched into the nursery, wild and unseeing, but purposeful. Abby Carter's heart seized. She threw back the covers. "Shadow," she cried, but he was already tearing into the floral wallpaper behind baby Emma's crib. Ethan stumbled after him, voice low and sharp. "Get him out. You'll wake her." But Shadow didn't stop. His claws shredded paper and scraped plaster with a desperation that looked like madness. Blood smeared the wall where his nails tore too deep. Ethan cursed under his breath, reaching for the dog's collar, then froze. A sound, so faint it might have been imagined. Buzzing. It came from within the wall, right behind Emma's crib. Abby's breath caught. She stepped forward, one hand to her chest, eyes locked on the nursery wall, now pulsing with a sickening hum. Ethan slowly peeled back a strip of wallpaper, exposing jagged plaster and something darker behind it. The buzzing grew louder. Shadow stepped back, his cloudy eyes turning to them, not wild, but urgent. A messenger finally understood. They stood in stunned silence, hearts thudding like war drums. The scent of plaster dust filled the room. Shadow whimpered once, then resumed his frenzied digging, blood streaking the white surface. He was hurting himself to protect something he could not even see. Abby's gaze drifted to Emma's crib. Her baby lay inches from a wall that now whispered danger. It hit her like a wave. Shadow hadn't gone mad. He had known. "Get something to open it," Abby said hoarsely, lifting Emma into her arms and backing away. Ethan ran to the garage, returning moments later with a crowbar and flashlight. The air in the nursery was taut with fear, the buzzing now an angry drone behind the plaster. Shadow, bloodied and panting, stepped aside, but never took his ears off the wall. His growl stayed low, constant. Ethan wedged the crowbar into a torn section of plaster and pulled. It cracked and crumbled, revealing lath and something alive behind it. Their elderly neighbor, Margaret Sullivan, appeared in the doorway, in her robe, drawn by the noise. "What in heaven's name?" "Stay back," Ethan warned. Shadow barked sharply again, staring at the wall as if it might leap out. Ethan leaned in with the flashlight, his face drained of color. "Abby, take Emma and leave the room. Now." "What is it?" "Bees," he said, voice flat. "Hundreds, maybe thousands. There's a hive inside the wall." Abby nearly dropped Emma. The thin barrier between their child and that writhing swarm had been wallpaper and drywall, and nothing else. And only Shadow had known. Firefighters arrived, followed by a beekeeper in a veiled suit. Carefully, they removed sections of the nursery wall. The hive was massive. "These aren't honeybees," the beekeeper muttered, face grim. "They're Africanized. Killer bees. 1 or 2 stings could be fatal to a newborn." Abby's knees buckled. She sat on the nursery floor, clutching Emma to her chest. And then she looked at Shadow. His head lowered, his tail limp, his paws torn and slick with blood, but his body still angled toward the wall. He hadn't stopped. Not until they'd seen. Not until she understood. Shadow hadn't always been blind. The shelter had told them he lost his sight in a fire, a heroic service dog who'd saved 12 children from an orphanage blaze. Abby remembered the first time she saw him, silent still, his clouded eyes somehow tracking their voices. Ethan had resisted. A blind dog with a baby on the way. Too risky, too unpredictable. But Abby had knelt beside the dog, her voice trembling as she stroked his fur. He didn't turn his back on those kids when the flames came. "How can we turn ours now?" The shelter worker had nodded solemnly. "He's special. He hears things before they happen, I swear." They called him Shadow. In the Carter home, he adapted quickly. Within days, he moved through furniture without stumbling, found his water bowl without hesitation, and settled beside Abby every night of her final trimester. Always, when she needed him most. Ethan noticed, even if he never said it aloud. When they brought Emma home from the hospital, the sun was warm, the air sweet with dogwood blossoms. Abby called it a sign, new life, new beginnings. Shadow waited by the doortail, sweeping the floor in slow arcs. They introduced him carefully. "This is Emma Abby," whispered, kneeling beside him. "She's ours." Shadow rose and approached the infant carrier. He stopped 6 inches away, ears perked, nose twitching, but never crossed the invisible line. Ethan had stared, stunned. He's being careful. That night, Shadow lay outside their bedroom, unmoving, except for the twitch of his ears, each time Abby got up to check on Emma. By the 3rd day, it became routine. Shadow never left the hallway during feedings. He accepted visitors with quiet dignity, but sniffed the pediatrician's bag suspiciously before allowing her to approach the baby. "Proper guardian," the doctor had murmured. "You don't see devotion like that often." The nursery had been Abby's labor of love. Soft yellow walls, hand-sewn curtains with gray elephants, and a vintage wooden crib, refinished by Ethan with the precision of an engineer. It was perfect until that night. They moved Emma into the room for the first time, baby monitor in place. Shadow lying quietly by the door. He didn't sleep. Not really. At 2:17 a.m., he erupted like a storm. His body went rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest. He pressed his nose against the nursery door, pacing, then barking, then clawing. Something's wrong with him. Abby whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Ethan tried to dismiss it. He probably needs to go out. But when they opened the door, Shadow bolted inside, straight for the crib's wall. And now, in hindsight, it all fit. Abby remembered what the shelter worker had whispered. He can hear things you can't. Faulty wires, hidden leaks, problems behind walls. Another family had almost lost their home. Shadow had warned them in time. Back in the present, as firefighters carefully peeled back more of the wall, Abby held Emma close and watched Shadow. He didn't flinch at the pain in his torn paws. He didn't lie down. His eyes, clouded and unreadable, stayed fixed on the crumbling plaster. "You knew," she whispered, but the dog didn't move. It wasn't pride that kept him upright. It was duty. The fire trucks pulled away slowly, their red lights spinning across the wet lawn. The beekeeper stood at the edge of the nursery, his veiled helmet in his hands, revealing a lined face and eyes still narrowed with disbelief. "In 30 years, he said quietly, "I've never seen a hive that size inside a house. And these bees Africanized. Killer strain, aggressive, deadly." Ethan tightened his grip on Abby's shoulder. The words fell like stones. "To an adult, dozens of stings send you to the hospital. To a baby." He trailed off. "1 or 2 stings could be fatal," the vet added. "Their venom is too strong. The immune system can't cope." A hush settled over the house. Abby stared at the wall Emma had been sleeping against. A few inches of plaster had separated her child from a swarm of death, and Shadow had known before anyone. He'd bled for her. Margaret, their neighbor, stood in the hallway, arms crossed, watching the dog with a quiet reverence. "He's got the sight," she murmured. Abby blinked. "He's blind." Maggie smiled gently. "Not that kind of sight, honey. My grandma called it the knowing. Some creatures just sense what others can't." Shadow stood watch at the doorway, bandaged paws, trembling slightly, but his head never turned. Every buzz still drew his attention. Even after the threat was revealed, he didn't rest. Because it wasn't over yet. Abby remembered the shelter volunteer's warning again. He hears before things happen. This wasn't superstition. It was instinct, sharpened by trauma, by training, by whatever deeper purpose the universe had etched into this dog's soul. He had once led 12 children through fire. Now he had saved their daughter from a different kind of burning. And he was still listening. Later that morning at the emergency vet, Abby sat watching through the glass partition as Shadow's torn paws were cleaned and bandaged. The clock read 4:37 a.m., but she felt no fatigue, just a sharp, unsettled gratitude. The vet, a woman with tired eyes and gentle hands, worked slowly. "Ripped 3 nails clean through," she said. He was tearing that wall with everything he had. Still, Shadow didn't whimper. "He'll heal," the vet added. "Tough old soul. Might walk a little stiff, but he'll be fine." Abby stroked the glass with her fingertips, whispering, "He saved her life." The drive home passed in silence. Ethan waited on the porch with Emma in his arms, a sheriff's deputy standing beside him. The deputy's voice was calm, but grave. "We've had 2 fatalities in the county from these bees. Children, one just 3 years old." The words hit Abby like a punch to the chest. Had Shadow not acted, Emma might have been next, and he'd known. Before the buzzing, before the danger became visible. Inside the nursery was now off limits, sealed, the hive removed. But Shadow refused to leave Emma's side. He limped to her bassinet and laid down beside it, bandaged paws, stretched out nose, turned toward her, his body still on guard. Later that day, the pediatrician called. Abby answered, cradling Emma in the rocker. "There's something you need to know," the doctor said gently. Emma's screening came back. She shows high sensitivity to allergens, including insect venom. If she'd been stung, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Shadow hadn't just saved Emma from discomfort or swelling. He had saved her life again. After the call ended, Abby couldn't sit still. She needed to know more about Shadow, about where he came from, who he had been before the shelter. She pulled up the adoption records, scanning the sparse details, then turned to local news archives. It didn't take long. Hero dog leads. Children to safety in orphanage blaze. Service dog saves 12 lives. Loses sight in fire. Faithful to the end. Dog refuses to leave hospital after handler's death. Shadow's real name had been Ranger. He'd belonged to Scott Matthews, a former firefighter turned orphanage maintenance manager. When a fire broke out late one night, Ranger had woken him and helped evacuate the children again and again until the roof collapsed. Scott was pinned. Ranger kept going. Blind and burned, he led every last child out. Abby stared at the headlines, her hands trembling. No wonder the shelter hadn't been able to place him. Not only blind, but carrying trauma deeper than scars. He had lost everything: his sight, his handler, his home, and yet he had survived. More than survived, served. When Ethan returned from sealing the nursery wall, Abby showed him the articles. His breath caught as he read. "I had no idea," he murmured. "They just said he'd helped in a fire." "He didn't just help," Abby whispered. "He gave everything." Emma stirred in her bassinet, and despite the pain in his bandaged feet, Shadow rose and moved toward her ears, swiveling. His movements were slow, deliberate, but sure. Ethan lifted the baby gently. "He still wants to protect her," he said, voice tight with emotion. "No," Abby corrected softly, her eyes filling again. "He needs to." That afternoon, Ethan's friend Rick, volunteer firefighter and handyman, arrived to help with repairs. He took one look at the photos of the hive the removal team had documented and shook his head. That thing was bigger than a beach ball right behind her crib. He knelt near, Shadow eyes narrowing. "Wait a minute. This the dog from the Pinewood Haven fire? The one they called Ranger?" "You know about him?" Abby asked. "Know about him?" Rick laughed softly. "They use that fire in training sessions. Scott Matthews was one of our instructors. His dog, your dog, was a legend." Ethan sat heavily on the arm of the couch, absorbing the weight of it all. "I met Scott once, on a job site years ago. Small world." Rick stood. "Small world, maybe. But that dog ended up here with you just in time to stop something none of us could have predicted. If that's not divine intervention." He trailed off. Abby found herself kneeling beside Shadow again, running her fingers through the thick fur at his neck. "You knew," she murmured. "Somehow you always know." Shadow leaned into her, sighing. Finally, a sound of rest. The tension in his body had begun to melt. Even injured, even blind, he had fulfilled the purpose that still burned inside him like a beacon. That evening, their old veterinarian, Dr. Vernon Willis, came to check on Shadow. He'd treated the dog after the orphanage fire. "I remember those burns," he said, unwrapping a paw gently. "We knew he'd never see again. Most animals withdraw after that kind of trauma. Not him. He never lost his purpose," Abby said quietly. "No," Dr. Willis agreed. "And maybe, just maybe, his other senses sharpened in ways we'll never understand." Storm clouds rolled in before nightfall. Thick, dark, fast-moving. Hector, the pest control specialist, had finished inspecting the house, guided in part by Shadow's nose and instincts. "Your dog's sharp," he admitted. "Found a few weak points I might have missed. Nothing major, just ants for now. But these old houses are full of surprises." Abby stood at the window watching Shadow limp through the yard, nose to the wind. His paws were still bandaged, his body worn, but his posture never wavered. She whispered, "He's still hurting." Ethan nodded. German shepherds are stoic. They don't show pain. Part of what makes them good working dogs. The wind picked up. The sky turned green-gray. The local news warned of possible outages and flash floods. Ethan prepped flashlights and a generator. Abby filled the tub, packed an emergency bag, and kept Emma close. Then the lights went out. No warning, just silence. The hum of the refrigerator vanished. The air system shut down. The storm screamed against the windows. Abby lit a lantern. In its glow, Shadow stood at the base of the stairs, his head tilted, ears locked on the ceiling. A low growl rose from his throat. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, already reaching for a flashlight. Shadow limped up the stairs. They followed Abby, clutching Emma, Ethan just behind. The upstairs hallway was hot, airless. Shadow led them to the master bedroom, the one sharing a wall with the sealed nursery. "Listen," Abby whispered, and they heard it. A new buzzing, faint, sinister, familiar. Ethan's face turned pale. "No," he said. "There can't be another hive." Hector cleared this. But Shadow growled again, nose pressed to the baseboard. Shadow began to scratch hesitantly at first, then with grim determination, tearing at the wall despite his injured paws. Ethan dropped beside him, running his hand along the plaster. "There's a bulge," he whispered, "and it's warm." A tiny crack near the baseboard split open. One bee emerged, then another. Abby gasped and stepped back, clutching Emma tight. "We need to get out. Now." But Shadow didn't move. He planted himself between the bees, and the baby body tensed, tail low, protecting again, without hesitation. A bee landed on his muzzle and stung. He flinched, but didn't retreat. "Shadow, come." Abby pleaded, her voice rising with panic. Still he held his ground, giving Ethan and Abby the seconds they needed to escape. They hurried to the basement, cool, dark safe. Shadow joined them just as the buzzing intensified upstairs. In the dim light, Abby checked his swollen snout. "The sting isn't too bad, but we need to watch him." Her hands trembled as she stroked his fur. Then she froze. "The medicine," she whispered. "Emma's jaundice drops. They're upstairs." Ethan stood. "I'll go. It's too dangerous." "It's in the living room, not near the bees. I'll be quick." Before Abby could argue, a deafening crack echoed through the house. Something massive struck, followed by a thundering crash. "The oak tree," Ethan said grimly. "It just came down." Shadow barked once, then bolted up the stairs. "Shadow," Abby called, but he was gone. Ethan followed seconds later, flashlight in hand. Abby stayed in the basement, clutching Emma, praying. Rain hammered the house. Thunder rolled. The old foundation seemed to tremble. Finally, Ethan returned, soaked and pale, but a live diaper bag in hand. The tree hit the dining room. Bees are swarming. He wouldn't come back. He tried to lead me somewhere, but it was too dangerous. Just then, a scratching at the top of the basement stairs. Shadow. Soaked, muddy, urgent. He barked once, turned, and looked back. He wanted them to follow. He wants something, Abby whispered. Like the first night, when he led us to the wall. Shadow barked again, more insistent. He turned and limped into darkness. Abby, the house is compromised, Ethan warned. We should wait out the storm. But she was already moving. I trust him. Together they followed the wounded dog upstairs through the wreckage. Rain poured through a gaping hole in the dining room ceiling. Furniture was shattered. Glass everywhere. Shadow paused at a crooked door near the back hall, one Abby barely remembered. A forgotten storage crawl space. His paw scratched at it once. Then he stepped aside. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside, a shallow utility cabinet. And tucked in the corner, Emma's backup medication bag. The same one Abby had thought was in the car. I forgot we stored this here, she whispered. If she missed both doses, she couldn't finish. Her knees went weak. Ethan caught her with one arm as Shadow slumped to the floor, finally spent. He had led them here. Again. That night they camped in the living room, Emma nestled between them on cushions. The house moaned in the wind, but inside their circle of lantern-light warmth, pulsed quietly. Shadow lay at the edge of their makeshift nest, head resting on his front paws. His breath was steady. His ears twitched at every movement from Emma. He really understands, Ethan murmured. Abby nodded. Not just what's happening, but why. He still believes it's his job to protect us. Her eyes fell on the old scars across his legs, the new bandages, the swelling from the sting. And still he watched over them, because that's who he was. The next morning, light broke through shredded clouds. Mud clung to the windows, but the storm had passed. Hector returned with a thermal camera, scanning the house thoroughly. Shadow limped at his side, alert, despite exhaustion. Your dog's doing my job for me, Hector muttered with reluctant admiration. Shadow paused at a basement window. Hector bent down. Small gap ants have found it. Not bees yet. But this guy's sharp. Ethan no longer needed convincing. He saved our daughter's life, he said simply. Hector nodded. I believe it. Later that day, Abby sat watching Shadow bask in a square of sunlight on the porch. His eyes, though blind, turned toward the sound of Emma's gurgle inside. I keep thinking, she murmured to Ethan. What if we hadn't adopted him? He didn't answer. He just laid his hand gently on hers. That evening, Maggie returned, a covered dish in hand and a knowing glint in her eye. My grandma would have said that dog was sent to you. Folks don't believe such things now. But sometimes the good Lord works through unexpected creatures. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Abby crouched beside Shadow once more. He didn't move, but his tail thumped faintly against the porch. You knew, she whispered, before any of us. You always know. Shadow sighed, resting his head against her knee. The world was quiet again. But he would stay ready, always. He had lost his sight, his home, his person. But he had found his purpose again, and a family that finally saw him for what he was. Not broken, not blind, but a guardian.